Hi, today I want to talk to you about mastering Einkorn Sourdough Starter. There's just something magical about the aroma of freshly baked bread in your kitchen. And at the heart of the tradition lies sourdough. And since we switched to einkorn flour because of our gut health issues, and you can read about that on the Farmer's Lamp, uh, I had to learn to make a sourdough starter. And there's a lot of different recipes and a lot of great ones out there. But today, I want to talk to you about creating and nurturing your own einkorn sourdough starter. Now, just the basics. Let's just start with the basics. What is a sourdough starter? A sourdough starter is a fermented culture that when you mix the flour and the water and they're allowed to sit and ferment, they're gathering in yeast from the air, which causes the fermentation process, and it takes the place of yeast. Now, sourdough has its own rate of rise. It's completely different from any quick rise or active rise yeast. But given the right treatment, the right nurturing, it can give your breads a good rise, just to me, as good as yeast. Now, if you're stepping into the world of einkorn flour for the first time, welcome. And you can go to the Farmer's Lamp and do a search for einkorn, or you can hit our recipes button, and then it has a list of einkorn recipes, and there's links in there to what einkorn is, why we use it, and our best tips for using einkorn wheat flour. So we're going to talk about sourdough starters, not just einkorn wheat today. So crafting an einkorn sourdough starter or any sourdough starter involves capturing a thriving community of yeast. They're always in the air. They're captured by the flour and the water because they feed on that. And it's in times past, it was easier. In the old days, people would just leave their starter sitting on the counter because they used it all the time. If you've read the Little House on the Prairie book, a series, Ma Ingalls had one and she shared it with Mrs. Boast. And then when Laura went to married Almanzo and they moved, she gave her part of it. And there are people who have kept their starters alive for years. I'm not one of those people. I have killed a few. So I have learned over the years of using sourdough how to make one thrive. Another thing about the past that it was easier, and I get this question a lot, why was it so easy for my grandmother to have one, or my aunt, or my mother, and not me? Well, a lot of the problem is our modern cleaning agents. While they're designed to kill bad bacteria, they also kill the good stuff. And so it's more of a challenge to capture wild yeast now because they're being killed by the chemicals that people use in their homes. Now, we don't use chemicals in our homes, so I don't have that problem. But when I first started making sourdough, I don't know, 30 years ago, I had a really nasty one. I mean, it tasted bad. It smelled bad. I went ahead and made bread with it because I thought that's what sourdough was. And it was horrible. And the lady who was teaching me asked me, what do I clean my home with? And I told her. And at that time, I was using chemicals. And she said, stop using your chemicals, wait a week, and try again. And sure enough, that was the problem. Now, what are the benefits of making a sourdough starter? Why would anybody want to, besides the delicious taste? Why would you want to make your own sourdough starter? Well, one of the first things is improved gut health. Active sourdough is very rich in beneficial bacteria, and it can contribute to the health of your microbiome in your gut. We have a post on the Farmer's Lamp, Einkorn sourdough starter, and you can read more details about that there in that article. The unique fermentation process in a sourdough starter had positive effects on blood sugar regulations, and research suggests that sourdough fermentation could lead to lower blood glucose levels. compared to non-fermented bread. Now, if you're diabetic and you know your regulations of what you are supposed to and not supposed to eat, so stay within those guidelines. Easier digestion. Sourdough in itself is easier on your digestive system. Einkorn sourdough starter is even easier on your digestive system. The lactic acid in the sourdough contributes to the breakdown of complex carbohydrates, and it makes it easy for the body to digest. So this can lead to gentler processes. And like I said, with the einkorn, you're already doing better with your gut issues if you're using einkorn. If you are sensitive to gluten, sourdough breads can help with that. They break down the fermentation process of creating a sourdough starter, breaks down those complex proteins to some extent. So it's easier. Sourdough breads and stuff are easier to digest. Um, Higher nutritional value. Fermentation enhances the nutritional profile of sourdough. Reduce phytic acid. Now, phytic acid is a binding agent in uh, wheat and flours, and it's reduced during sourdough fermentation. So that enhances your mineral uptake, your ability to take the minerals. They're more readily available. Just the time-tested method of it. Did you know that the ancient Egyptians have records of sourdough starters? So I mean, it's not a new thing. So it's just kind of coming back around. And the versatility. Not only is it bread, it's pancakes. I love sourdough pancakes. It's biscuits. It's pastries. You could go on and on with the things you can use your sourdough starter to create. Now, there are a few lessons that I want to share with you to help you avoid problems essential for your einkorn sourdough starter. Your sourdough is said to be living. It's a living thing. It changes with the temperature in your home, with the atmosphere of your home, um, with, say, what you're cleaning with. We've already talked about that. It's not going to behave the same all the time because, the air in your house is different all the time. It's uniquely yours. It's unique to your home and your kitchen. So it's a living, changing thing. Temperature affects the pace of your sourdough's development, which probably isn't a surprise. Warmer environments speed things up, and cooler environments slow them down. I started a new starter a few days ago, and of course, it's winter here now, and my house is nice and warm. And on the third morning, I was shocked that it was ready to go. It didn't need any more time before I could use it. So that's an unusual. You can expect 3 to 6 days as a normal, 5 to 6 days. But like I said, I have had it ready in 3, and this time it was. So um, your water, the quality of your water. If you have a water source that has chlorine or fluoride in it, you might want to use bottled water. Even though we're on a spring-fed system here, we use our Berkey water filter for drinking and cooking. It's just something we're comfortable doing. So you might want to get you a Berkey, and if you do have chlorine and fluoride in your water, especially, you want something to take that out. The type of flour that you use influences the taste and the texture. As your sourdough starter ages, the sourdough taste intensifies. So if you have a mature starter and your recipe says to use a large starter to flour ratio, you're going to get a very robust flavor. Say your recipe calls for 1 3/4 cups of starter. Well, that's a pretty good amount of starter there. If you use that, you're really going to taste the sourdough. So if you don't want that strong taste from your mature starter, just back off the amount of starter and replace that amount, the difference, with warm water, and that'll give you a little bit milder flavor. We talked about it taking 5 to 6 days, and just be patient with it. Like I said, I have had them ready in 3, but 5 to 6 is something you should expect. Now, after baking, you've made your bread. You can give your sourdough starter a break by storing it in the fridge until you're ready to bake again. You can take it out of the fridge 2 days before you want to bake, and that allows it to get to a really good room temperature and get activated because you're going to feed it once it's room temperature, and you're going to feed it, and that'll give it a chance to wake itself up. Now, if you bake bread once a week, you don't have to worry about refrigerating it. If you bake it more than that, then certainly you won't have to worry about that refrigerating it. But if you want to refrigerate it, you can. When it comes to storage, glass only. Use a glass jar with a loose fitting lid. Plastic and metal will impart taste over into your starter, and you don't want that, especially metal. It gives it a really nasty taste. Now, the aeration of your starter, it's not so much that your starter can breathe, it's more so that in that exchange of yeast, and the yeast is feeding on the flour and the water, and it's fermenting, it gives off gases, and so you're just allowing the gases to escape the container. So that's the main reason you want a loose fitting lid. I have used a crochet dish towel. I have used just a loose fitting dish rag over mine. So whatever you've got, use that. Let's see, we talked about the old timers, how they used it. I store my starter in a cabinet beside my refrigerator, between my refrigerator and my stove, because that's the warmest place in my kitchen, and it's out of direct sunlight. You don't want your starter sitting in direct sunlight. I get asked a lot, my starter separated. Is it dead? What can I do to save it? It's fine. It's a natural process. It's going to separate. When you feed it and stir it up, it's going to incorporate fine again, and you'll see that it's fine. It's okay for it to separate. Metal utensils. We talked about the metal container. Don't stir it with metal. I only use wooden spoons with my sourdough. Even just putting a metal spoon in it to stir it, it reacts with the acids in there and can leave a bad taste. So opt for wooden spoons, okay? To safeguard against mold and unwanted bacteria, some people suggest, now I don't do it every time, but they suggest transferring your starter to a clean jar every other feeding. I make that determination because as you have one for a while, you'll see stuff gets built up around it, and just where the starter gets on the side of the jar when you're stirring or when you're pouring, and over time that'll get hard and turn a yellowy color. I just every few times, whenever I feel like it, I put the remaining starter from where I've made bread or pancakes, whatever I've made, over into a clean jar. So you can do it every other time if you want, or you can just do it whenever you see the jar or you feel like the jar needs to be refreshed. And to make a starter, excuse me, you're going to need 1 cup of flour, and like I said, I use Einkorn all-purpose flour. You don't want any self-rising flours. It has to be all-purpose flour, and 1 cup of water. And you're going to put those together in your glass jar, and you're going to stir them real well. And you're going to put the loose lid or the cloth, whatever you're going to put over it, on it. You'll find in the article on the Farmer's Lamp complete instructions. So I'm going to run through these real fast. They're not going to be complete, but you can, like I said, find the details on the article. Now, day one, excuse me, you've made your water, you've made your starter, you've got your water and your flour in your glass jar, and you've covered it loosely. Just let it sit at room temperature for 2 days. You don't have to stir it. You just leave it sitting out of sunlight in a warm place for 2 days. Okay. On day 3, you're going to feed your starter. You're going to add 1 cup of all-purpose flour and another cup of water, 1 cup of warm water. That's 105 to 115 degrees. Okay. You're going to use a wooden spoon, and you're going to stir it up and allow it to sit for 2 hours. After that 2 hours, check for bubbles. There may even be a foam if you have a really healthy yeast, in the air. Check, it may be ready to go, but check for that foamy layer and bubbles. In the afternoon of day 3, Okay, you fed it in the morning, you've let it sit all day, and now we're in the afternoon of day 3. If you have bubbles or there's a foamy layer present on the top of your starter, you're ready to make bread. Now, if there's not, don't worry about it. We said 3 to 6 days. So wait another 2 hours. When you check in the afternoon, wait another 2 hours and check it again. If there's still no bubbles, go ahead and feed it a quarter cup of flour and a quarter cup of warm water and stir that up real well and then let it sit overnight. Now, day 4 morning, if you have bubbles, your sourdough starter is thriving and it's ready to go. If it doesn't, feed it another quarter cup of flour, another quarter cup of water, and let it sit. Stir that up good and let it sit until day 5 or 6. If there are no bubbles on day 4, I'm going to go ahead and say it's by the end of day 4, if you don't have any bubbles, it's not alive. So you just need to start the whole process over. For some reason, you didn't capture any yeast, and sometimes that happens. So don't beat yourself up about it. Just start over again. But you can let it sit to day 5 or 6 to see if it'll come on alive. But go ahead and feed it a quarter cup of flour and a quarter cup of warm water every day until day 6. And of course, if you don't see any activity by day 6, it's dead. So we talked about how to create it and feeding it. It's essential that you feed it. The optimal time for feeding largely depends on your usage. If you use it every week, if you keep it refrigerated and you plan to bake, remember you have to take it out of the refrigerator for 24 hours and let it come to at least 24 hours and let it come to room temperature. 48 is ideal, but after 24 hours, you can feed it and stir it and then let it sit another 24 hours. But I usually, if I do refrigerate it, I wait 48 hours and then I feed it. But you do what works for you. These are guidelines. This is how I do it, and it might work for you. I hope that it does. It should. For starters that you keep at room temperature, that's if you use them once a week or more often. Just feed it every day. Give it a quarter cup of water, quarter cup of flour every day, and stir it up at least once a week. If you don't want to do every day, that's fine. But at least once a week, it needs to be fed and stirred up well. Keep an eye on it. If you see that your sourdough starter has fewer and fewer bubbles, there's no foaming in it, that's a clear signal to you that it's hungry and it wants to be fed. So go ahead and feed it the quarter cup of water and the quarter cup of flour. Regular feeding, whether you're preparing for baking or just simply maintaining it, ensures a robust and flavorful Einkorn sourdough starter, or any sourdough starter really. Now, you're ready to make bread. It's day 3 and you've got bubbles, or it's day 4 and you've got bubbles, or it's a mature starter and you're ready to make bread. How do you do that? It's called making a sponge. So I keep mine at room temperature. Now remember, if you keep yours in the fridge, you've got to give it 24 to 48 hours to warm up and feed. Okay, you fed it, and now you're ready to make a sponge to make your bread. So what are we going to do now? For larger families, or those planning on baking, like I said, once a week, keeping it out like the old timers did in a warm place out of direct sunlight is ideal. You're ready to make bread. In the morning, add a quarter cup of water and a quarter cup of all-purpose flour now, and the water is 105 to 115 degrees into your sourdough, and you're going to combine them real well and then put the cover back on it. Before you go to bed that night, you're going to give it another quarter cup of water and another quarter cup of flour, and you're going to repeat this feeding process for 2 full days, in the morning and the evening. Now, if you have enough starter after 1 day, say your recipe calls for 1 3/4 cup, and you've got 2 cups of starter left over, feed it 1 more day, because you want to have enough left over to keep your starter alive. Your recipe calls for 1 3/4. So if you feed it another day, you're going to have 2 1/4 cups of 2 1/4, 2.5 cups of sourdough starter. So that leaves you enough to be able to have a remainder, have your starter, and make your bread, make your recipe. Okay. Now, you're going to, if you're feeding it twice a day, and that's not convenient for you, if you are rushing out of the house and you're away from home, you can feed it once a day. You can feed it a half a cup of warm water and a half a cup of flour at one time. It usually, to me, it does better with twice a day feedings. But if you do once a day feedings, just be sure it's not in the sunlight and it's in a very warm place, and it should be fine. Look for foaming signs and bubbles in it on day 2. And if you see that, then you have life and you can use it. Like I said, if you have enough starter. If not, you just feed it until you have enough. Now, when you're preparing to bake your bread or your pancakes or whatever it is, your biscuits, whatever you're going to be making, you pour off, then you stir it really well, and you pour off into your measuring cup the amount your recipe calls for. The remainder is what you're going to continue to feed and keep alive as your mature sourdough starter. All right, now, congratulations. You've successfully started your Einkorn sourdough starter. I know it sounds complicated, but it's not. It is so easy. And like I said, you can find more details in the post on the Farmer's Lamp, because I know when I'm talking, I go pretty fast, and some people are visual and they need to see it and hear it. So the video will be on the Farmer's Lamp in the post so that you can have both there if you need it. Now, let's talk about troubleshooting. Bubbles, separations, and bad tastes. We've pretty much covered everything, but let's just do a recap. Certain bakers include sugar, a teaspoon of sugar in their sourdough starter, and that's a real controversial subject among sourdough lovers. There are two perspectives on this. One is that by introducing sugar, it's not a true sourdough starter, so they say you're cheating. It's not sourdough. The other side of that says yeast feeds on sugar, so since it's a natural yeast nutrient, it is part of sourdough authenticity. So you have to decide how you feel about that. I do not, and I have not incorporated sugar into my sourdough starter for at least 10 years. But the decision lies in your preference and what you want to do. Some people say that giving it a little sugar jumpstarts it. And I can see that because sugar feeds yeast, but it's just not something that we do. So let's say you have limited bubbles, very little activity going on. Check your water quality. I would start with my water. If you are using water that has chlorine or fluoride in it, they hinder the fermentation process. If you've been with the Farmer's Lamp for any length of time, you know how I feel about those things. So if you don't have a Berkey, you can't get a Berkey, use bottled water or some kind of filtered water. That's where I would start with limited bubbles. The other issue may be a temperature variation. Be sure that your room temperature is optimal for fermentation, which is 70 to 75 degrees. In the summer, it can get up to 80 degrees in my kitchen, especially when I'm cooking. So, mine really thrives, in that temperature. So that's where I would go. Remember your starter separation. And I get asked this question all the time. It's normal. It's okay. It'll be like the water on the top and the flour on the bottom, but it's okay. When you feed it, it'll revive and go right back to where it needs to be. For a strong sourdough flavor, remember you can you can use whatever your recipe calls for. For a milder flavor, decrease it and replace the difference with warm water. I have a foul odor and flavor. I got this email last week. The sourdough smells. It does. It smells yeasty, but it was a less than pleasant smell. She was cleaning with chemical products, so I would start there. Stop cleaning with chemicals, wait a week, and then restart your starter. And that should solve the problem. Another reason for it to smell funny or look funny would be you've neglected it. Neglecting a sourdough starter can lead to unwanted bacteria taking over, and that causes unpleasant flavors. So give it regular feedings, and especially if you keep it at room temperature, it needs regular feedings. Putting it in metal or plastic, that's going to give you unwanted flavors. Stirring it with a metal spoon or a plastic spoon, silicone, anything other than wood, it's going to give it could give it an odd flavor. So that would be my top tips. We talked about the containers and inconsistent temperature, poor quality of flour. Unfortunately, in our food system, that's just the way it is. Some of the frequently asked questions that I get about einkorn sourdough starters. What makes it different? The einkorn flour. That's all the difference is. Einkorn is an ancient wheat. It has a totally different gluten than modern wheat, and so it has a very rich taste to it. A very, I don't want to say nutty flavor, but it has a very good flavor to it, and so that enhances for us the taste of our sourdough. How long will it take a einkorn sourdough starter to become active? Remember, we said typically 5 to 6 days. I have had it at 3 often, many times, but by day 4, you'll know if it's alive or not. By day 5 or 6, it should be fully alive and ready to go. Can I use my sourdough starter? Can I use whole wheat flour for einkorn sourdough starter? Absolutely. Just remember to add extra water to the starter, 3 tablespoons extra, because whole wheat will absorb more liquid. Okay, what's the best way to store the einkorn sourdough starter? If you don't use your starter every week, store it in a glass jar with a loose fitting lid in your refrigerator. If you use your starter to bake at least once a week, keep it in a warm, dark place like a cabinet or on the back of your refrigerator, somewhere out of the sunlight. Can I revive a separated einkorn starter? Remember again, separation is normal. Feed it, stir it, and it'll be fine. I hope you have enjoyed talking about the einkorn sourdough starter. Remember, it's a living entity. It's unique to your home. It's influenced by temperature, water quality, the type of flour that you use. And if you follow the tips that we've given the article and that we've talked about today, you'll quickly master the art of maintaining a robust einkorn sourdough starter. And this ensures delicious, nutritious bread making experiences for you and your family. Happy baking! Until next time.